The Korean War, which raged from 1950 to 1953, was one of the most brutal and tragic conflicts of the 20th century. Tens of thousands of soldiers from both sides faced unimaginable horrors, but few suffered more than the American prisoners of war, POWs. Captured behind enemy lines, these men were subjected to extreme forms of torture and psychological abuse. This is their story. The Korean War began when North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. In response, the United States and its allies came to the aid of South Korea. The war quickly escalated into a brutal, back-and-forth struggle, with both sides vying for control of the Korean peninsula. By the time the war ended in 1953, over 7,000 American soldiers had been captured by the North Korean and Chinese forces. As American soldiers were captured, they were often taken to isolated prison camps, deep in the mountains of North Korea or Manchuria. For these men, their nightmare was only just beginning. Conditions in these camps were horrific. Starvation, disease, and brutal treatment were a daily reality. But the worst came in the form of torture, both physical and psychological, designed to break the will of the soldiers and extract intelligence or force confessions. The physical torture American POWs endured ranged from beatings to more grotesque forms of violence. One common method was the use of waterboarding, where prisoners were forced to swallow large amounts of water to the point of drowning, only to be revived and forced to repeat the cycle. Another common tactic was sleep deprivation, leaving prisoners awake for days on end, their minds slowly deteriorating. But the psychological torment was often just as devastating. Prisoners were subjected to brainwashing techniques, a mixture of propaganda, isolation, and intense pressure to force them to betray their country or to confess to crimes they didn't commit. They were told that their families had abandoned them, and that the US government would never come to their aid. One of the most infamous aspects of the torture was the forced confessions. Under intense duress, many prisoners were coerced into signing false statements, sometimes denouncing their country or supporting communism. These confessions were used for propaganda purposes, to convince both the public and the POWs themselves that the communist cause was just. Some American soldiers were even filmed making these false confessions, leading to widespread confusion and distrust among their families back home. It wasn't until much later that the full extent of the torture was revealed. Many of these confessions were nothing more than a product of mind-breaking tactics. The long-term effects of the torture were devastating. Many prisoners developed what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. They were haunted by nightmares, flashbacks, and an overwhelming sense of guilt, even though they had done nothing wrong. Survivors often struggled to reintegrate into society after their release. The psychological wounds of war, especially the trauma of being a prisoner, lingered long after they returned home. Despite the overwhelming brutality, many American POWs showed extraordinary resilience. Some resisted, refusing to betray their comrades or their country, while others maintained their hope through small acts of defiance or solidarity. They found ways to endure, whether it was through secretly communicating with fellow prisoners or by holding on to memories of their loved ones back home. Their strength, even in the face of such terror, remains a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the most unimaginable suffering. The torture suffered by American soldiers during the Korean War left a scar on both the individuals who endured it and the nation as a whole. Many of these soldiers never received the recognition they deserved for their suffering. And as time has gone on, fewer and fewer veterans of the Korean War remain to tell their stories. But their legacy, and the lessons learned from their suffering, live on, reminding us of the horrors of war and the deep, lasting costs of violence and conflict. The Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice agreement, but for the American prisoners who endured such unimaginable pain, the war never truly ended. Their sacrifices, their strength, and their courage will never be forgotten.